What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're going to talk about the top 10 cards that get better once Allegiance drops. Now, I say top 10, but actually the deal is we're going to talk about like 25 plus cards in this video. So I want to go ahead and jump right in. We got a lot to discuss, so we don't have much time. And aside from the actual main top 10 list and the honorable mentions, there's some stuff here at the beginning of the video that I actually want to talk about first. It didn't make the main list because all this stuff seems a little bit too obvious, you know? These cards are so self-evident that it feels kind of lazy to just throw them on the list when I could use those slots to talk about some spicier stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. Here are the cards that I think are too obvious to be on the main list. Now, the first of these cards is, without a doubt, definitely Teabag. A lot of people are nervous, or maybe even scared is the proper word, I'd say it is, that just the addition of Hallowed Fountain is going to make fairy decks way, way better and run rampant in the format, just go completely nutso. But on top of that, Azorius presumably gets a whole suite of new cards that might work well with Teferi. And anytime Wizards prints a 2-mana or less card that can be cast at instant speed in blue or white, then you have to pay attention because they have the possibility of making Teferi even better. But there are other cards in this category, most notably and probably most obviously Goblin Chainwhirler. Once the mana gets a little bit better, this will probably experience a slight bump in play. And to an extent still leave Champion as well, that's obvious too. But with the right mana, black-red and green-red shocklands, I think that this will experience a bit of an uptick. Another card I want to briefly mention in this portion of the video is Lan Orrells. According to Mtg Goldfish, this is actually already the #1 most played creature in Standard at the moment, so it can't improve that much, but the ceiling on Lan Orrells is notoriously very high, so with green-red and green-blue getting, a lot of representation in this next set, I think it's entirely possible that Lan Orrells gets even hotter. And finally for this section, I just want to briefly flash checklands up on the screen. With shocklands coming into the format, checklands just naturally get better. So Glacial Fortress and Dragon Skull Summit and cards like that, Hinterland Harbor and the like, Isolated Chapel, I've named all but one, will be much, much better cards, if only because they get the proper checks in the form of shocklands. So just remember, keep all those cards in the back of your mind, but there's a lot more juicy stuff I want to get to on this list. So I want to go ahead and start with number 10 because the juice does not get much looser than Quasi Duplicate. Now this might seem like a wonky pick, and in truth, that's why it's all the way up here at number 10 to start the list off, because this is a little bit speculative, and I mostly want to put home runs on the list, but there are a couple of speculative things. Quasi Duplicate definitely being one, but I just want to point out that in a format with more creatures, Quasi Duplicate is just a naturally better card, and we're definitely going to get a bunch more creatures, not to mention the fact that Azorius and Simic creatures, not necessarily often, but they do have a propensity for enter the battlefield triggers, especially Simic creatures that'll put counters on stuff, or maybe even draw cards sometimes when they enter the battlefield. So if they print any stuff like that, just keep your eye on Quasi Duplicate, it instantly gets better. Here comes number 9. Now, you see, with the Shocklands coming out in Allegiance, yeah, Shocklands again, I'm sorry, they're going to be important cards, they're super impactful, and they're going to be a running theme in this video. I apologize in advance for that. But in any case, with those coming out in Allegiance, a lot of people are putting a renewed focus on some of the Ixalan tribes. It makes perfect sense. They have perfect mana. Maybe they'll finally run right. But I think that most of these tribes have a specific creature that benefits the most from guild representation and shocklands. So most of the Ixalan tribes are going to be on this list somewhere, except for pirates. I don't really have an example for pirates, or high hopes for that matter. But most of the tribes I do think could get a bump from Ravnica Allegiance coming out. So with that in mind, the first tribe to be represented on the list is the Merfolk tribe. Now, as far as Merfolk go, I could be lazy here and just say Cumina and Merfolk Mistbinder get better, just normal Merfolk tribal stuff, Deep Root Champion, whatever. But honestly, I don't think that those are the cards that stand to get the best bump. I'm just not sure that Merfolk Tribal is going to be a top tier deck in Standard. But there are Merfolk I could see getting a huge bump from this set. Notably, Tishana's in that list, but I don't think that it's going to get quite the bump that Tatiova's likely to get. Tatiova's my pick for number 9 because sometimes, it's not super often, but sometimes Simic will have a kind of ancillary land theme, and even though Tatiova dies to everything from Lightning Strike to Lava Coil to just about any non-cast down piece of removal in the format, she's fairly fragile, especially for 5 mana, so I don't think she's the best pick. That's why she's all the way up here at number 9. But if there is a kind of running lands theme in Simic this time around, Tatiova's definitely the merfolk that benefits the most, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. But at some point in this video, we gotta talk about the Orzhov Syndicate, because they're my favorite guild, and it's my list. But there are just objectively a ton of kind of underrepresented Orzhov cards in this format that are already really good, but they just don't have the mana to run right, you know, they're not consistent enough. But with the addition of Godless Shrine, all that's gonna change, and I think that maybe the Orzhov card that might benefit the most from getting Godless Shrine, and I know that this card seems a little bit cursed, but I swear to you, you'll get these jokes in a second, that I think Profane Procession might be due for a breakout. You get it? Cursed, swear, profane. But anyway, on to the meat here. I think the Profane Procession is actually an extremely underrated card that does end up in sideboards from time to time, especially when the format is more mid-range in aspect. Then this will come in from sideboards as a 1 or 2 of and just wreck house. So I think that, again, if the format becomes more mid-range instead of trending towards control, like some say, if somehow we get a mid-range format here, then I think the Profane Procession could be powerful enough for main decks, especially given that it's going to have the proper land support. Really keep your eye on this card, because it's not half bad already. But let's actually stick with the Orzhov Syndicate for a second, because I want to continue discussing them. Again, they're my favorite. But I think that when ordering this list, you don't want to necessarily put vampires super close to the top or anything. I think vampires is going to get better, just as a matter of course. Godless Shrine is going to make the vampires deck a better deck, just period. But is it going to be a top tier deck? I'm not too sure, but there is one vampire that I think benefits more than just about any other vampire from not only getting Godless Shrine and vampires themselves getting better, you know, Rising Tide lifts all boats and all that stuff, but this card might also work really well with some of the mechanics that we're in some ways likely to see in Allegiance. So keep an eye on Elenda the Dusk Rose. Now don't get me wrong, because of this pick here, there are plenty of vampires that could get better in the next format, just like the Merfolk tribe and Merfolk Mistbinder. A card like Legion Lieutenant obviously gets better if the Vampire tribe becomes more playable. Vona is easier to cast more consistently, and that's at least worth pointing out. And obviously, Adanto Vanguard, I can say with confidence, is one of the best 2-drop creatures in the format, probably the best, and in some ways the format is warped around Adanto Vanguard. It's a vampire, just remember that it could get better, but I picked Elenda for this slot because it's entirely possible that there's some kind of sacrifice mechanic in the Orzhov guild, because there often is some kind of running aristocrats theme, even if again it's a little tertiary, ancillary. It's often present in some form or fashion, and having a higher concentration of those aristocrats type cards in the format is only going to benefit Elenda. So not only is it easier to cast, it might be easier to abuse as well. Let's go ahead and finish off the tribes. Why don't we just do that? You know, we're only halfway up the list at this point, but I actually don't want to put too much stock in the Ixalan tribes. I do think that we should talk about dinosaurs for just a second, but there's only really one dinosaur that I think is going to benefit greatly from getting not only the proper mana, but again, representation out of the Gruul Guild, and that's Registrar Alpha. Now, in some ways, this isn't really a tribal pick at all. You know, I don't think that, unlike some of the other tribes we've discussed already, there's not really a whole lot of dinosaurs I want to bring up in this part of the video. It's mostly just Registrar Alpha, because I think this is a great 5-drop for Gruul in general. Once we get Stomping Grounds, this card just gets better as a matter of course. So keep your eyes out for something during spoiler season that can function as a better 5-drop for this than Gruul decks, but as things stand currently, this is, period, maybe the best 5-drop for Gruul decks, and that's not going to change unless we see something way, way better than it. And that's kind of hard to envision because Registrar Alpha is already a very solid card. Here we are, the actual halfway point now. Number 5 is the only Planeswalker on the list. I just want to double check here, but yeah, it's the only Planeswalker on the entire list. It's actually, too, the only Rakdos card on the list, because Rakdos really isn't that represented in Standard, but it is about to be, and honestly, just the addition of Blood Crypt is going to make Angrath the Flamechained a much better card, but there's other reasons, too. Now, not only does Angrath benefit from just Blood Crypt being in the format, I think that's a huge part of why Angrath gets better, and most of the cards on the list, for that matter, are going to be, oh, this is a Simic card that people are overlooking, or oh, this is a Rakdos card people are overlooking, like in this case. Just having the proper mana and the proper shock lands makes these cards way better, and Angrath is no different, but at the same time, I think that in a format where control is a very important deck, and things are shaping up to look that way, then a black-red Planeswalker like this, once resolved, is a great tool against those control decks. And we may see it out of sideboards, we may see it in a red-black mid-range deck, who knows. but at the same time, all I'm saying is that Engrath's Plus ability is very, very good. It functions as not only a tool against control decks to get important cards out of their hand, but also a win condition if you keep it out long enough, because it deals 2 damage every time it makes them discard a thing, and eventually its ultimate will kill them, especially against decks that are trying to, fuel search for his Kanta. So I think that Engrath only stands to get way, way better in a format that may be dominated by control. Just keep an eye on Engrath. I think that he stands to get much better, not only because the mana's better, but also for meta reasons. Now, number 4 might seem a little bit weird, especially to be all the way up here on the list, but in a format with near perfect mana, we're going to have all of the shock lands, a bunch of the check lands, it's going to be the Wild West out there in terms of mana basis. It's going to be possible to do nearly anything with your mana base. Now, that format tends to foster 4 and 5 color decks that actually need a little bit more help than just their mana base in getting the proper colors that they might need to cast their spells. So with that said, I think that cards that allow you to do that, either fix your mana or ramp or do both, are going to be at a little bit more of a premium in the upcoming format to help support 4 and 5 color decks. So my main pick for this slot is Gift of Paradise, but there's a ton of cards that could get a little bit better because 4 and 5 color decks will be more the norm. Now, Gift of Paradise is the pick for this slot, but there are a litany of cards that could go in the slot and deserve consideration. District Guide is probably the best of them, honestly. Getting a body and being able to relevantly, perhaps, get a gate is going to be really good once we have all 10 gates in the format. But even Chromatic Lantern could possibly get better. I'm not too sure, but I do like Chromatic Lantern a lot for 5 color decks, so there's that to consider. And there's even Circuitous Route. Again, this gets better with all 10 gates in the format and 4 and 5 color decks possibly being the norm, so look at Circuitous Route as well. But Gift of Paradise, I think, is the best of all of these. It's not a body like District Guide, but it does produce any color mana that you want to. It's also ramp, which is going to be really important. It's harder to kill than a District Guide. It's only 3 mana, and it gains you that life back, so it kind of negates an early attack step from aggro decks. So I think there's just so much about Gift of Paradise that's good, that in 4 and 5 color decks it'll probably be the go-to card if they want to not only ramp but fix their mana that extra step. Now my number 3 is a little bit speculative, but I have a lot of faith in it, so I'm going to put it all the way up here in the top 3, because I think that one of the best creatures in the next format, hands down, might end up being Pelt Collector. Now, Pelt Collector is in some ways like Quasi Duplicate. It's better in a format that has more creatures. In fuller formats, this card is just going to be much, much better, and I think that with the addition of a bunch of Gruul creatures especially, and even with a bunch of Simic creatures, Pelt Collector stands to get much, much better, especially in Simic, where there's a +1/+1 counter theme, so the fact that this has +1/+1 counters and receives them may, have some kind of sideways benefit with a card that wants you to get +1/+1 counters on your guys. So keep that in mind. But even in the Gruul clan, they just play big dudes that grow Pelt Collector naturally. So I think this card stands to gain so much and be one of the premier 1-drops in the entire format once this next set comes out, and into the future when more set comes out. Again, just like Quasi Duplicate, once there are more creatures in the format to help proc this, both when they enter the battlefield and when they die, then Pelt Collector is just going to get better and better as time goes on. Here we are at number 2, and it's a big old dragon. What could it possibly be? There's a bunch of big old dragons in the format that stand to get better when Allegiance comes out, but I think that the one that might actually benefit the most for a variety of reasons is Chromium. Now, this slot, even though I picked Chromium for it, is another slot that has a lot of cards I could talk about. Niv Mizzet is probably the most important one. This has already seen 4 of main deck play in a bunch of decks in Standard right now because it's just an unbelievable card. Tried to tell you. A lot of us tried to tell you. It's not like I was the only one or anything, but Niv Mizzet is going to be even better in a format that could be dominated by control. So again, Grixis or Jeskai control. This is going to be an amazing mirror match, kind of card. Maybe out of the sideboard, but again, it's already seen play in main decks. I don't know if that's going to change. The fact that it's uncounterable is going to be very, very important. But same thing with Nezahal. This is already an important sort of sideboard card against control decks and mirror matches. And we got to talk about Carney T if we're talking about anti-control cards too. This could get even better, God forbid. But I think Chromium is my pick for this slot because this list is kind of about cards that improve, and all of those cards already see some play, but Chromium doesn't see as much play. It's already one of the finishers for Esper control decks, but Esper control is not really the most popular kind of control deck. That may change, though, when it gets the right mana. It gets both Hallowed Fountain and Godless Shrine, and its check lands get better. And with Esper mana being a little bit more common in the next format, I think Chromium is just going to be a vastly improved card. Now, before we get to number one, I'm going to slip in just a couple of honorable mentions here. I don't have too many this video, but the honorable mentions this time are mostly a factor of being almost purely speculation and dependent on what mechanics are going to be in the next set. So I didn't feel super comfortable putting them on the main list, but you do want to watch them when Allegiance comes out. It all depends on, again, what mechanics we end up seeing. But some cards that stand to get better are a Johnny's Pride Mate. Let me just put it this way. Cards that gain life could get better. The Orzhov Syndicate sometimes gains life. The Orzhov Syndicate will sometimes have some life gain cards in it. So cards that benefit from gaining life may get a little bit better, especially things like Pride Mate, but even Dawn of Hope and Resplendent Angel, you know. So if there are life gain mechanics in the next set, just keep an eye out. Remember that these cards will get a little bit better. The only other thing I really want to point out in the honorable mentions section is Forerunners. You just kind of want to watch these and look at the creature types during spoiler season of new cards, because you never know. You know, these might end up tutoring up one of the best creatures in the entire format. And they haven't been super relevant up to now. I mean, the best thing you can do with Forerunners, off the top of my head, is, you know, a cool budget deck came out this last season. It's basically Esper, and it uses Forerunner to go search up a Trotta. And that's a really cool idea, and you never know if something even better than that is going to be, you know, available once we get a creature of a certain creature type. So again, just keep your eye on Forerunners. Here we are, dude bros and lady pants. We are at number one. And what could it possibly be? Well, if you've been paying attention to the crap I've been spouting on the channel lately, then you might have actually guessed it by now, because number one, everybody, is Chamber Sentry. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Chamber Sentry. I'm totally serious. Number one, big time pop, and this card's actually going to be very serious, I think, once Allegiance comes out. What can I say about old C.S. Lewis? I guess that's a good nickname that I haven't said already on the channel. You know, I've talked about this card like 3 different times. It was in my sleeper video. I just did a video about it. I've done like 2 separate Bant decks where this card is kind of a centerpiece. I have a lot of faith in it just with the mana we have now, but once we get Shocklands and even Guild Gates to a lesser extent, this card just has the chance at blowing up. You know, I'll say this again a bunch of times, and I've already said it a couple of times on the channel, but it's often just a bear with upside. You know, a 2-mana 2/2 that you can use to shoot down another creature, hit someone in the face, you know, later on in the game. Once you drag things out, you can just bring this back over and over. It's a recursible creature that scales with the amount of mana you can produce. There's just, this card is really, really good. Resistant to removal, blows apart the other side of the board, you know. It's no Walking Ballista, and that's why people have mostly written it off. It's not as good as Walking Ballista. There, I said it. But Walking Ballista didn't have a built-in way to bring it back like 4 or 5 times in a game and just finish things off without even ever having to attack. Like, this card is very good, and once we actually do have the mana to make it work even better, I imagine it will break out at some point. I'm telling you, I know I sound like a crazy person, but keep your eyes on Chamber Sentry. This card could be amazing once we have the mana to actually make it work. But whew, all right, you're probably going to hit me in the comment section for that. But do it. Go down to the comment section. I'm tapped out for this one, but it's your turn. Let me know how you felt about all of these, or any cards that I may have missed, things that you think are going to get better when the next set comes out. And also do the YouTube stuff. You know, like, do all the things, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more content coming up, plus spoilers and more decks and all that stuff. So subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and consider throwing $1 in the Patreon jar if you haven't done it yet. It helps out a lot around here. It's like the best thing you can do for me. If you really feel like it, if you've got the skrill, throw $1 at the Patreon, and I will let you know what decks we're doing next, and I'll let you vote on decks and lists and stuff like that to see what I do first. So do all that stuff, and also make sure if you want to order any of these cards and help speculate on them with me, then you can just click the first link in the description and go over to TCG Player. They help sponsor my content, but they're also the cheapest place you're going to get any of these cards online if you want to speculate on them. So make sure you hit the first link in the description. Just clicking the link helps the channel out. That's it. Hope you enjoyed the content. I'll be back at it on Friday with a super special video. A lot of work's going into it, so make sure you tune into that a Friday afternoon. But anyway, pretty sure I'm done here. So let's do the final roll thing. Anyway, I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. And in all seriousness, I just almost... That probably sounded really loud. Sorry about that, you guys, but I almost knocked the microphone over. In all seriousness, spread love and be kind. Do it.